The morning air in Chicago, Illinois bit through Daniel Whitaker's thin jacket as he stepped off the bus and stared up at the glass tower that had swallowed nearly a decade of his life. Hale and Company. Logistics rose like a polished monument to money, 40-plus floors of steel, mirrored windows, and quiet power. The kind of building that never looked tired, even when the people inside it were. Daniel adjusted the strap of his worn messenger bag and checked his watch. 6:12 a.m. He was early. Like always. He wasn't early because he loved the job. He was early because being late cost more than minutes. It cost respect. It cost stability. And stability was the only thing he could guarantee his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, now that it was just the two of them. Daniel walked into the lobby, nodded to the security guard, and flashed his badge without breaking his stride. "Morning, Mr. Whitaker," the guard said, like he said every day. "Morning," Daniel replied. 9 years. 9 years of showing up no matter what. He had worked through a fever that made the world tilt. Through snowstorms that shut down the city. Through nights when Lily cried herself to sleep because she missed her mom, because a mother who promised she'd come back never did. Daniel never told his boss those things. He never told anyone. He wasn't the kind of man who believed in being rescued. He believed in surviving. Up on the 20th floor, the operations office was already humming, printers groaning, keyboards clicking, radios squawking. Daniel hung his coat, rolled his shoulders, and started his day the way he always did, silently, efficiently, without asking for anything. That was his reputation. Reliable. Unshakable. Invisible. The last one wasn't a compliment. But Daniel had learned to accept it. At exactly 7 a.m., the glass doors to the executive wing opened, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Charlotte Hale stepped out. Mid to late 20s, blonde hair tied tight, heels sharp enough to cut glass. She moved like someone who'd never been told no in her life. Everyone straightened the moment she appeared. Voices lowered. Smiles became careful. Charlotte wasn't officially the CEO. Not yet. But everyone knew who her father was. Victor Hale. Billionaire. Founder. Owner. And Charlotte carried that last name like it was a weapon. She didn't greet the room. She didn't need to. Her eyes scanned the floor like she was inspecting inventory, not people. They landed on Daniel. He felt it instantly, like a spotlight. Charlotte's gaze slid away, uninterested. Daniel exhaled quietly and focused on the shipment reports in front of him. An hour later, his phone vibrated. He froze. Daniel never got calls during work hours unless something was wrong. He glanced down. St. Mary's Elementary School. His pulse jumped. He answered quickly, turning slightly away from his desk. "Hello, Mr. Whitaker," a woman's voice said, calm but firm. "This is Mrs. Patterson from St. Mary's." Yes, this is Daniel. Is Lily okay?" A pause. "Lily is fine," Mrs. Patterson said. "But we have a situation. She fainted during morning assembly. The nurse checked her. She's stable, but she's shaken and asking for you. We strongly recommend you come pick her up." Daniel's throat tightened. "I'm on my way." "Thank you," the woman replied gently. "She's a brave little girl, Mr. Whitaker. But she needs her dad." Daniel ended the call and stared at the screen for a second like it might change what it said. He couldn't leave. But he had to. He stood, grabbed his coat, and walked toward the executive wing. His steps felt heavier with every meter, like the building itself was resisting him. Charlotte Hale's office door was half open. Through the glass wall, he could see her standing near a whiteboard, talking to 2 managers. She was smiling, thin, controlled, like someone pretending to be human. Daniel waited at the door until her eyes flicked toward him. Her smile vanished. "What is it?" Charlotte asked, not even hiding her annoyance. Daniel swallowed. "Ms. Hale, I need to request a day off. Just today." The managers exchanged a quick look. Charlotte's eyebrows lifted, like she'd heard a joke. "A day off?" "Yes," Daniel said carefully. "My daughter fainted at school. They want me to pick her up." Charlotte stared at him. Then she laughed once, short and sharp. "You've got to be kidding me." Daniel kept his voice steady. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't urgent. Charlotte stepped closer, and the air around her felt colder than Chicago winter. Do you understand what day this is? Yes, Daniel said. I know the quarterly freight audit is today. I already finished my part of the reports. I can remote in later if... No, Charlotte's voice snapped like a whip. This isn't about reports. This is about discipline. We don't build an empire by letting people disappear whenever they have family issues. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't raise his voice. It's one day. I've been here 9 years. I've never requested time off. That's your choice, Charlotte said, as if his sacrifices were nothing more than a hobby. One of the managers cleared his throat. Ms. Hale, Daniel's record is... Charlotte cut him off with a glance. I didn't ask. She turned back to Daniel. Let me explain something to you. People like you get comfortable. You start thinking loyalty buys privileges. Daniel felt something rise in his chest. Anger, humiliation, disbelief, all tangled together. But he still tried. This isn't privilege. It's my child. Charlotte's eyes hardened. And this is my company. Daniel stared at her. Your father's company. That was the wrong sentence. The room went silent. Charlotte's lips parted slightly, like she couldn't believe an employee had spoken a truth she didn't like. Then her face settled into something sharp. You're done here, she said. Daniel blinked. Excuse me. Charlotte stepped back toward her desk and tapped a button on her phone. Security, she said into the intercom. I need Mr. Whitaker escorted out. Immediately. Daniel's stomach dropped. Ms. Hale, he said, still calm, though his voice felt like it was walking on glass. I'm not trying to cause trouble. My daughter. You should have thought about that before you decided to challenge me, Charlotte replied. Daniel looked at the managers, but neither met his eyes. They were afraid. Security arrived within a minute, 2 men in black suits, polite but firm. One of them held out a hand toward Daniel's badge. Daniel didn't argue. He removed the badge and placed it into the man's palm like he was handing over 9 years of his life. As he turned to leave, Charlotte called after him, voice loud enough for the floor to hear. Let this be a reminder. No one is irreplaceable. Daniel stopped for half a second. Then he kept walking. He didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing him break. Outside, the cold slapped him across the face. Daniel stood on the sidewalk, staring at the traffic rushing by as if the world hadn't just shifted under his feet. He was unemployed. Because he asked for 1 day. He pulled out his phone and called the school back. This is Daniel Whitaker, he said. I'm coming now. Tell Lily I'm on my way. As he hung up, his reflection caught in the building's glass. Tired eyes, strong shoulders, a man who'd carried too much alone. And for the first time in 9 years, Daniel let himself feel it. Not the fear. Not the shame. The promise. He would protect his daughter. Even if it meant walking away from an empire. The apartment was quiet in a way Daniel Whitaker wasn't used to. Not peaceful, quiet like something had been taken away. Daniel sat at the small kitchen table in his modest Southside Chicago apartment, elbows resting on the scarred wood, staring at the phone in front of him like it might ring if he looked hard enough. Across the table, Lily colored silently. Too silently. Normally, she talked while she colored. Stories about school, imaginary adventures, questions about everything from dinosaurs to the moon. Today, she was focused, tongue pressed lightly to the corner of her mouth, crayons moving carefully inside the lines. Daniel hated that look. It was the look she wore when she sensed something was wrong but didn't want to make it worse. How are you feeling? Daniel asked softly. Lily looked up and smiled, a brave, practiced smile that broke his heart every time. I'm okay, Daddy. The nurse said I just got dizzy. Daniel nodded. I'm glad you told someone. She hesitated. Did I get you in trouble? The question landed like a punch. Daniel forced his face to stay calm. No, sweetheart. You never get me in trouble. She studied him the way only children could, seeing more than they were supposed to. You don't have work tomorrow? She asked. Daniel took a breath. No. Oh. She paused. Is that good? Daniel reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "It means I get to spend more time with you. That's always good." Lily nodded, satisfied enough, and went back to coloring. Daniel leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. He hadn't told her yet. He didn't know how. After Lily went to bed, Daniel stood in the narrow hallway, listening to her breathing settle into sleep. He waited a full minute before quietly closing the door. Then he let himself feel it. The fear. The weight. The unknown. 9 years at Hale and Company had been his safety net. Health insurance. Predictable paychecks. Routine. Structure. All of it gone because one woman decided loyalty didn't matter if it inconvenienced her authority. Daniel rubbed his face and exhaled slowly. He couldn't spiral. Not tonight. He opened his laptop and started searching. Warehouse jobs, logistics roles, anything remotely close to what he'd been doing. Most required references. Some required certifications Hale and Company had promised to help him earn eventually. Eventually never came. After an hour, Daniel closed the laptop and stared at the dark screen. That was when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Daniel hesitated, then answered. "Hello." "Daniel Whitaker," a deep voice said. Controlled. Familiar in a way he couldn't place. "This is Victor Hale." Daniel sat up so fast the chair scraped the floor. "Yes, sir," he said automatically. "I won't keep you long," Victor continued. "I was informed earlier today that you were dismissed from my company." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Yes, sir." There was a pause. Not awkward. Deliberate. "Do you mind telling me why?" Daniel hesitated. This was the billionaire. The man whose name was on every wall, every paycheck, every rule. But Daniel had already lost everything that job could take from him. "My daughter fainted at school," Daniel said evenly. "I asked for 1 day off. I was terminated." Silence. Longer this time. Then Victor spoke again, his tone lower. "How many days off have you taken in the last 9 years?" Daniel didn't have to think. "None, sir." Another pause. "Daniel," Victor said, "where did we first meet?" Daniel frowned. "Sir." "At the Mercer Foundation charity dinner," Victor clarified. 6 years ago." Memories surfaced instantly. The ballroom. The white tablecloths. The spilled drink. "You were a guest?" Daniel asked, confused. Victor let out a quiet breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "I was the host. You were the man who helped my granddaughter when she slipped near the stage." Daniel remembered it now. A little girl. Crying. A twisted ankle. He'd carried her to a quiet room and stayed until help arrived. "You refused the cash my assistant offered you," Victor continued. "You said, 'I was just doing what anyone should.'" Daniel swallowed. "I didn't think it was worth remembering." Victor's voice softened. "I did." Daniel closed his eyes. "I've been following your career quietly," Victor said. "Your attendance. Your output. Your consistency. You are the kind of man companies claim they value." Daniel didn't know what to say. "So," Victor continued, "I'd like to have dinner with you tomorrow evening. My treat." Daniel hesitated. "Sir, I don't want to cause any—" "This isn't about the company," Victor said gently. "It's about understanding." Another pause. "And Daniel," Victor added, "bring your daughter." Daniel's throat tightened. "She'd like that." "Good," Victor replied. "I'll send you the address." The call ended. Daniel sat there in the quiet apartment, phone still pressed to his ear, heart pounding. He wasn't relieved. He wasn't hopeful. He was confused. The next evening, Daniel stood outside La Couronne, an exclusive private restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan. It wasn't the kind of place people wandered into by accident. Valet parking. Frosted glass. No visible menu. Lily clutched his hand, eyes wide. "Daddy, this place looks fancy." Daniel smiled. "Just remember your manners." "I always do," she said seriously. Inside, a hostess glanced at Victor Hale's name and immediately straightened. "Right this way, Mr. Whitaker." They passed the main dining area, soft jazz, expensive laughter, polished silverware, and moved toward a discreet corridor lined with artwork. At the end was a door marked Private Dining. Inside, the room was elegant but understated. A long table, warm lighting, floor-to-ceiling windows showing the city lights reflected on the water. Victor Hale stood when they entered, tall, gray at the temples, calm in a way that came from decades of power exercised quietly. "Daniel," he said, extending a hand, "and this must be Lily." Lily shook his hand solemnly. "Nice to meet you." Victor smiled genuinely. "The pleasure is mine." They sat. Dinner arrived smoothly. No fuss, no performance. Victor spoke to Lily about school, asked her favorite subject, listened, really listened. Daniel watched, surprised. At one point, Victor turned to Daniel. "Tell me about Lily's mother." Daniel hesitated, then answered honestly. "She left when Lily was 2. Victor nodded. "I'm sorry." Daniel shrugged. "We do fine." Victor studied him. "You've done more than fine." As dessert was served, Victor leaned back slightly. "Daniel," he said, "I need you to understand something. I didn't invite you here to offer you your job back." Daniel met his gaze. "I didn't expect that." "Good," Victor said, "because I wouldn't insult you like that." Daniel blinked. "My daughter believes leadership is about authority," Victor continued. "She's wrong. It's about judgment." Victor folded his hands. "Tomorrow night, Charlotte will be dining here with potential investors." Daniel's stomach tightened. Victor's eyes held his. "I want you here again." Daniel frowned. "Sir, I don't understand." Victor smiled slightly. "You will." Across the city, Charlotte Hale reviewed her schedule, unaware that the man she dismissed as replaceable was about to sit at a table she believed belonged only to people like her. And tomorrow, that illusion would crack. Charlotte Hale hated being late. Not because of courtesy, but because lateness suggested weakness. She adjusted the sleeve of her tailored ivory blazer as she stepped out of her black sedan in front of La Couronne, the private restaurant that had quietly become her preferred stage. Tonight mattered. 2 West Coast investors were flying in, men who respected money but worshipped confidence. Her job was to make sure they left believing Hale and Company was untouchable, and that she was the future of it. "Everything ready?" Charlotte asked her assistant as they walked inside. "Yes, Ms. Hale. Private dining room is set. Your father is already here." Charlotte nodded, lips tightening slightly. Victor Hale always arrived early. Always calm. Always observant. Sometimes, she hated how much he noticed. They walked past the main dining area, past familiar faces, bankers, executives, old money pretending not to look impressed, and toward the private corridor. The door to the private dining room was already open. Charlotte stepped in first. Her confidence lasted exactly half a second. She froze. At the far end of the table sat her father, relaxed, jacket unbuttoned, speaking quietly to a man seated beside him. A man Charlotte recognized instantly. Daniel Whitaker. Clean-shaven. Composed. Wearing a navy blazer that fit him better than she remembered, posture straight, calm hands folded on the table like he belonged there. Beside him sat a little blonde girl, swinging her feet gently under the chair, smiling as Victor said something that made her laugh. Charlotte's heart slammed into her ribs. For a brief, humiliating moment, she wondered if she was seeing things. Then Daniel looked up. Their eyes met. Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He simply acknowledged her, politely, neutrally, like one would acknowledge a stranger in a shared space. Like she no longer mattered. "Charlotte," Victor said, rising slowly. "You're right on time." Charlotte forced herself to move, to breathe, to keep her face composed. "Dad," she said. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "I didn't realize this room was occupied." Victor gestured calmly. "It is. By my guests." Charlotte's gaze flicked back to Daniel. "Guests," she repeated. "Yes," Victor said. "Daniel and Lily Whitaker." Lily waved cheerfully. "Hi." Charlotte nodded stiffly, her mind racing. What was he doing here? Why was he here, with her father. The investors entered moments later, breaking the tension. Introductions were made. Handshakes exchanged. Polite conversation flowed. Charlotte took her seat, careful, controlled, every movement measured. But she couldn't focus. Every time she spoke, she felt Daniel's presence like a weight, not judging, not challenging, just existing. Confident. Unbroken. At one point, one of the investors leaned toward Victor. "Your granddaughter seems fond of your friend here." Victor smiled. "Daniel has a way with children." Charlotte's jaw tightened. Dinner progressed. Wine poured. Courses changed. Finally, Victor set his glass down gently. "Before we discuss business," he said, "there's something I'd like to address." The table quieted. Charlotte straightened. Victor looked directly at her. "Charlotte, do you recall Mr. Whitaker?" Charlotte held his gaze. "Yes." "And do you recall the circumstances under which he left Hale and Company yesterday?" Charlotte's pulse spiked. "Dad, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," Victor said calmly. The investors exchanged glances. Charlotte inhaled. "He was terminated for insubordination." Daniel remained silent. Victor turned to him. "Daniel, would you mind explaining?" Daniel didn't rush. He didn't dramatize. "My daughter fainted at school," he said evenly. "I asked for 1 day off. I was dismissed." The room fell quiet. One of the investors frowned. "After how long with the company?" 9 years, Daniel replied. "No prior absences." Charlotte felt heat creep up her neck. Victor nodded slowly. "Thank you." He turned back to Charlotte. "Charlotte," he said, "you told me once that loyalty should be expected, not rewarded." Charlotte stiffened. "In leadership, consistency matters. We can't make exceptions based on emotion." Victor studied her. Emotion didn't cloud his judgment. It revealed yours. Charlotte opened her mouth, then closed it. Victor continued, voice calm but firm. "You fired a man who never failed this company. Not for misconduct. Not for incompetence. But for prioritizing his child one single time." One investor leaned back. "That's concerning." Charlotte's chest tightened. Victor's voice softened slightly, but only slightly. "You believed authority meant dominance. That people are interchangeable. Tonight, I wanted you to see the consequence of that belief." Charlotte stared at Daniel, disbelief mixing with something far worse. Realization. Victor gestured around the table. "Daniel is not here asking for his job back." Daniel met Charlotte's gaze then, finally speaking. "I don't want it back." The words were quiet. Final. Charlotte swallowed. Victor nodded. "Instead, Daniel will be joining me on a new venture. One where integrity isn't optional." Charlotte's breath caught. "You're partnering with him?" "Yes," Victor said. "Effective immediately." Silence crushed the room. Lily looked up at Daniel. "Does that mean you won't be sad about work anymore?" Daniel smiled gently. "I won't be sad at all." Charlotte felt the room closing in. The investors exchanged impressed glances. Victor turned to Charlotte one last time. "Leadership," he said, "isn't about reminding people they're replaceable." He paused. "It's about knowing who isn't." Charlotte lowered her eyes. For the first time in her life, money didn't protect her from the truth. And across the table, the man she fired for 1 day off sat quietly. No revenge, no triumph, just dignity. Which hurt more than anger ever could. The ride home that night was quiet, but not heavy. Daniel Whitaker drove with one hand on the wheel, the city lights of Chicago gliding past the windows like a slow river of gold. In the back seat, Lily leaned against the door, fighting sleep, her eyes bright with a kind of happiness that came from feeling safe. "Daddy," she murmured. "Yes, sweetheart. Mr. Hale is nice." Daniel smiled. "He is." She yawned. "Is he very rich?" Daniel chuckled softly. "Yes, very." Lily thought about that for a moment. "But he still listened to me." Daniel glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "That's how you know he's actually rich." She smiled, satisfied, and drifted off to sleep. Daniel drove on, feeling something unfamiliar settle into his chest. Relief. Not the loud, reckless kind. The quiet kind that didn't demand celebration. The kind that whispered, "You're going to be okay." The next morning, Daniel woke before his alarm out of habit. For a moment, panic flickered. He'd slept too long, he'd missed the bus, then he remembered. No bus. No badge. No tower of glass deciding his worth. He stood at the window of his apartment, watching the city wake up, and for the first time in years, the day felt open instead of predetermined. Later that afternoon, Daniel found himself back at La Couronne, this time alone. Victor Hale waited in the private dining room, sleeves rolled up, jacket draped over a chair. The room felt different without the tension, like it had exhaled. "Daniel," Victor said, standing. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for the opportunity," Daniel replied. Victor waved him to a seat. "Let's be clear. This isn't charity." Daniel nodded. "I wouldn't accept it if it were." Victor smiled faintly. "Good." They spoke for hours. About logistics. About efficiency. About treating people like assets worth protecting, not tools to be used. Victor listened as Daniel explained things he'd observed quietly for years. Waste, bottlenecks, morale issues no spreadsheet could measure. "You saw all this while staying invisible," Victor said. Daniel shrugged. "Someone had to keep things moving." Victor studied him. "That humility is rare. And dangerous, if exploited." Daniel met his gaze. "I won't let it be exploited again." Victor nodded once. "Neither will I." By the end of the meeting, nothing was signed. No handshakes for cameras. No announcements. Just an understanding. Daniel left knowing his future would be built deliberately, on his terms. Across the city, Charlotte Hale sat alone in her penthouse office long after sunset. The investors had left politely. Too politely. Her phone buzzed earlier with a message from her father requesting a meeting the next morning. No subject line. No explanation. Charlotte stared at the skyline, replaying the dinner over and over. Daniel's calm. His refusal to beg. The way he hadn't looked back once. She had always believed power was loud. That authority meant being feared. She was beginning to understand how wrong she'd been. The next day, Victor Hale addressed the executive board. Charlotte sat straight backed at the table, face composed, but her hands were clasped tightly beneath it. Victor didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Effective immediately," he said, "I'll be stepping back from daily operations. Certain responsibilities will be reassigned." Charlotte's chest tightened. "Leadership evaluations will be ongoing," Victor continued. "Not based on revenue alone, but on judgment." His eyes flicked to Charlotte for just a second. It was enough. She nodded once, accepting what wasn't said. Later, as the board dispersed, Charlotte approached her father. "You embarrassed me," she said quietly. Victor turned to her. "No. You embarrassed yourself." She flinched. "You're capable," Victor continued. "But capability without empathy becomes cruelty. And cruelty erodes empires faster than failure." Charlotte swallowed. "What happens now?" Victor met her gaze. "That depends on what you learn." Across town, Daniel walked Lily to school, slowly this time. No rushing. No clock chasing him. She skipped ahead, backpack bouncing. "Daddy," she said, spinning around, "are you going to work with Mr. Hale now?" Daniel smiled. "Something like that. Will you still come to my assemblies?" "Every one," he said without hesitation. She grinned and ran ahead. Daniel watched her go, heart steady. Weeks later, Hale and Company quietly announced a restructuring. New partnerships. New leadership philosophies. The headlines praised innovation and foresight. They never mentioned Daniel Whitaker. He preferred it that way. He worked from a modest office overlooking the river, building systems that worked because people believed in them. He hired carefully, listened constantly, paid attention to what others overlooked. And every afternoon, he left on time. Not because he had to, because he chose to. One evening, Victor joined Daniel on the balcony outside the office. The city glowed beneath them. "You know," Victor said, "there was a time I believed money solved everything." Daniel smiled faintly. "It solves some things." Victor nodded. "But not the important ones." They stood in silence for a moment. "Daniel," Victor said, "do you regret how things happened?" Daniel thought about Charlotte, about the badge he handed over, about the cold sidewalk. "No," he said finally. "If I hadn't been fired, I might have stayed invisible forever." Victor smiled. "Then perhaps she did you a favor." Daniel shrugged. "Maybe." Far below, the city moved, busy, loud, indifferent. But in that quiet moment, Daniel Whitaker felt rich in a way no balance sheet could capture. He had his daughter. He had his dignity. And he had learned what true power looked like. It wasn't announced. It didn't threaten. It simply endured.